Can I get up on the screen a photo of Betsy? This is my little friend Betsy. Now, when you're looking at Betsy, I want you to tell me how many cows you see in the picture. Just think about it. And if you can see 4 cows in the picture, that's really good. Now, I want you to look. Now, don't tell anyone next to you. What else can you see? There's something. Don't put your hand up yet, see, because I showed you at home. But what else can you see in that picture? Because once you see it, you won't unsee it. Just little show of hands. Who's seen something else in the... Okay. See, we're beginning this new series, and what we're doing is we're looking into God's Word to find answers that we sometimes haven't seen before. They're in God's Word, but sometimes we can just miss them. But once you see them in God's Word, you can't unsee them. So who can see 2 people's heads looking at each other on the cow's face? You look down the cow's nose and there's 2. Somebody had a creative little brainstorm making that. And just for you, Dave, I've got one more slide. If we can put that up, thanks. Studies show that cows produce more milk when the farmer talks to them. It's a case of in one ear and out the other. And I did that just specially for you, Dave. As we go through this series, we're calling it Why God? And then we're looking for questions. And Mandy's going to continue what I'm talking about today. She's going to continue that next week because it's such a big subject we're starting today. And it's come out a question. In fact, multiple questions were based around this. And there's been some really excellent questions come in. We still want more. So you can text them, you can send them in those online, just on Facebook page and Messenger, send it to us. We've got scraps of paper at the back with little things, but we want more questions. But what I'm going to speak on today, or try and address, it's framed sort of like this. The question, there's a multiple number of questions, but this is basically the question. Why, God, do you allow so much pain and suffering on earth? It's a great question, but the problem with the question is that it's based on an assumption that God allows. And that sort of sounds like a safe thing to explain things that are hard to explain. And I know people say, I've heard it said many times, people say, well, God doesn't cause pain and suffering, but He allows it. And it sort of sounds acceptable, but it's not helpful. Because if you were to look up a dictionary, the word allows literally means to let someone do something, to let someone have something. So on Thursday this week, my grandson Jesse turned 13. Now, great achievement, I know. But as a special treat for him turning 13, if I'd said to him that morning, I will allow you to take the Spotlighting ute, drive into Nagle by yourself and drive home again, he would have loved it. But Coral would have been the one that jumped on me, not Jesse, because I would have been the one that allowed him. And what I found fascinating this week, as I started to look into this word allow, I thought I'm going to have a look at our Bibles to see where the word allow is used. And it's almost not there. I can only find one occasion anywhere the word allow is actually in our English translation of the Bible. And it's this verse, and I'm going to read it to you. It's in Romans 14:22. And Paul says this, "Blessed is the man who does not condemn himself by what he allows." There's great wisdom in that. But what happens in our world is that when we think God allows things, our world condemns God. If we think that, somehow deep down, we're actually condemning God because we're thinking he's allowed starvation, he's allowed tsunamis, poverty, he's allowed child abuse and rape and murder and cancers. And when we do that, when we say that, I know it's a way to try and explain things, but when people say that and someone repeats it and someone else repeats it and it gets repeated, it gains this power all of its own. And what if it's wrong? What if it's built on a wrong assumption? Because if you build something on a wrong assumption, you're going to end up with a wrong conclusion. And see, what happens is when you hear that and you draw a conclusion, you come to a place where you think, well, okay, God is this powerful, all-supreme being who can do anything. So if he doesn't step in and stop things, then he mustn't care. He mustn't love me. And especially if you have been hurt by things that you think, well, God could have stopped that. He didn't have to allow it. You can end up feeling a little bit bitter and twisted and withdraw from God. And I think that's what most people assume as a conclusion. Some people will go the other way. They'll go, well, no, God is love. God does care for me, but he must be just weak. Or he would step in and stop the tragedies that we hear about so often. Izzy, it's really good to see you. Really good big welcome. And especially like last night, we had a fantastic night at Coolmatong, the induction of the interns. And Tamika, great to have some of your family here today. Really enjoyed meeting Mark and Chris last night. Had a great chat to them. And Bianca, we had fun spotlighting last night, didn't we, hey? It was good. I just got to grab a drink. In 2004, I and a few mates were heading up to far north Queensland, above Cooktown, on Aboriginal lands to go fishing. I shot a big saltwater crocodile and we had this adventure, right? But on the way up, we were going past Innisfail. And in that area, there's a place called Tully. And Janelle, my cousin, lived in Tully. And Janelle came down to our wedding from North Queensland to Corals and my wedding. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to call in and see her? So I said to my mates, can we just call in and see my cousin? And they said, look, no, we're really short of time. No, but what about on the way back? Well, when we went up North Cooktown, there'd been cyclones and the fishing wasn't good. So we ended up going west across the top of Queensland and going to Karumba and fishing there. And so when we came back inland. We didn't come back down the coast. And it was Sunday morning, Easter Sunday morning, and we're just driving through Western Queensland heading home. And I got a phone call from Coral to say that my cousin Janelle had just been killed, along with her 18-year-old daughter Sarah and her 9-year-old daughter Julia and a husband, that they were all dead. And it was just such a shock because only days earlier I'm thinking I'm going to go and see them and I get this news. What I didn't know that day when Coral rang me was that Janelle had actually been murdered and had her 2 daughters had also been murdered by Janelle's husband, and then he killed himself. Janelle loved God. She served God faithfully in her local church, with a family. Gifted musician, as were her daughters. And only the week before, she'd been practicing for Easter Sunday. And they're at the church, and Janelle is playing sax and Sarah's on clarinet. And John, Janelle's husband, the father of the girls, he was there and he was listening, and he said to somebody, "They're good. Really special." And John was also a Christian, but for 10 years he's been tormented by depression and anger. And he was a cane farmer, and there was a lot of pressure financially on the farm. And so he'd had to get a job off the farm to try and get some income coming in. But because of his mental health issues, because of this depression and anger, these outbursts that he'd have, they ended up at work saying, "Don't come back. Like, take some time off, but you can't work here anymore." And as things started to deteriorate, Janelle actually came up with a plan of escape. She had kept clothes out, spare clothes out in her car. She had a safe house to run to if she needed it. And she told her girls, there was a code word. She said if she yelled at them, "Go," that Sarah would grab her 9-year-old sister and they'd run to the car and drive away and not come back. On Good Friday, Janelle found that her husband had put ammunition all through the house. And so she found all this gun ammo, she collected his guns, and she went to the police and handed all his guns in. And it was about the third or fourth time she'd been to the police over things, and they were powerless to help her. Janelle loved her husband, John, and she was trying to get him all the help she could. She got him to go to their GP, but he wasn't honest about the thoughts he was having and the dreams he was having. And about 2 a.m, Easter Sunday morning, my Auntie Shirley, Janelle's mum, she woke up with a start. And she sat bolt upright in bed. She said to me, she never said that. But she was worried and fearful about Janelle. And she wanted to ring her. But the police psychologist has said, don't do anything to upset him. Don't keep things normal, keep things peaceful. And so this mother's heart was just beating for concern for her daughter. So she didn't ring. She did the only thing she could do, and that was to pray. But she couldn't get back to sleep. And at 6 a.m, Tanya, Auntie Shirley's other daughter, arrived with the devastating news that there'd been this massive house fire and explosion at Janelle's, and no one had survived. What they didn't know is that while Auntie Shirley was praying for Janelle and her girls, John had quietly gone from room to room, killed his wife and his 2 daughters, and then he'd put all these agricultural fuels and explosive stuff in the centre of the house and set that on fire and blew everything up, including himself. And they even found pictures that were in the centre of the house, 20 metres outside of the house, that had just been blown out and weren't even touched by fire. In the coroner's report, John had smoke in his lungs, but the girls and Janelle didn't, which meant that they had died before the fire. Why didn't God answer Auntie Shirley's prayers? Why didn't he intervene and stop this tragedy in a Christian home where they actually loved each other. There may be no answer that will fully satisfy the human heart to those questions. But remember the photo of the cow that I put up at the start? Hidden in plain sight was something that could be overlooked so easily in that picture, but once you see it, it can't be unseen. And in the opening chapter of Genesis, chapter 1, in our Bibles, God placed something there, something that once we see it, it can't be unseen. And if you can see it today, it will give you understanding of how this world operates and how God set it all up. What's God's part, what's the role he plays, what's the part that we play. And it's found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And I'll read the start of it. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule.'" If God had said, let's create these funny little things called people in our image, in our likeness, and let us rule, then God would be the one who allowed John to do what he did that Easter morning. But that is not what God said. Our sovereign God, the all-supreme ruler of this universe, took something. Can I have that, please? He took something that he had by right and by position, which was rulership of this earth that he'd made. And he took it and he gave it to us. And he's never going to take it back until Jesus returns. Just to be clear, God repeats this transfer of authority and power, responsibility and rulership. He repeats it. He doesn't just say it once. And in verse 28 he says, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it and rule over." The ancient Hebrew Research Centre explains how the English word subdue struggles to bring through the fullness of the Hebrew word. It's limited. And they go on to say that it means to bring into control, to bring order out of chaos. And when you combine the word subdue with the word rule, it literally means to rule by going down and walking among the subjects as an equal, to bring order out of chaos, but not as a dictator, as a benevolent leader. And when God threw the ball to us, it wasn't just a transfer of power and authority, but a responsibility for everything that takes place on this earth. And his will is that we would actually rule, like reflecting the kingdom culture of heaven on earth. That's his intention. And I want to read you what Jesus said in Matthew 20, verses 25 to 28, and this is in the New Living Translation. "But Jesus called them together and said, 'You know that the rulers of this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. You even have to wear masks sometimes. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many.'" To try and explain why God doesn't step in and stop an innocent child being sexually abused, people say this thing that God gave us free will and he won't override our free will. And that is true. That really is true. But it's not the full picture. It's not the whole picture. There's more to that picture. It's Genesis 1, chapter 1, when God didn't just give us free will, he gave us rulership. And when John allowed, not God, but when John allowed his inner torment, the voices in his head that said, get out of this world, kill them, you can't leave them behind. When he allowed his thoughts to form a plan, and when John followed through on that plan, he took the power, the authority, the rulership that we've all been given, and he used it in a way that was contrary to God's will. And we know God's will because he put it in stone. Even just 4 words he had chiseled in stone that says, you shall not murder, you shall not kill. And on that stone he chiseled other things that are God's will. And we have all, every one of us in some way, abused the rulership God gave us, and we have gone against God in some way. We've done things our own way. And it's why Jesus had to die on the cross. And rulership has great power for good. And it also has a dark side, as does love, sex, creativity, imagination, the capacity to see what doesn't exist and bring it into reality. An iPhone, an iPad, satellites, air-conditioned houses, hey? We appreciate aircon on a really hot day. Drones that can take amazing video footage from high above and can drop bombs. At each separate stage of creation, God said, let there be. But when it came to creating humanity, God said, let us create in our likeness, in our image, and let them rule. And Jesus came to restore all that was lost back in the garden. And the last words Matthew records that Jesus said before he went back to heaven, back to the Father, are these: all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And then he slapped a little deputy badge on our chests. And he commissioned us. He says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. Back in Genesis chapter 1, when God says to fill the earth and subdue it and rule it, that word subdue is a word picture. And it's a picture of taking your foot and placing it on your enemy's neck, your opponent, and to subdue them. It means to bring people and nations into submission. But it's not confrontational. It's done through serving people. That's why God put the word submit and rulership together, because that rulership is a servant rulership. It's not a lording them over people. And it's done by making disciples because people want to be. And there's a joy and there's a privilege in it. And it's expressed through love. And there is an enemy to subdue, but that's not people. And we've been given this authority and this commission to be light and salt and do the go word. And that is what this rulership is for, this authority, this influence we have. Imagine if the pain and the suffering in our communities could somehow be reversed. If we could help bring order out of chaos. If even our nation could submit to God's will and purposes. See, it sounds impossible. When you look at the mess around us, it sounds impossible, but see, the world is changed by people who know they can't, but believe they can. And it starts small, it begins in our own personal life. And instead of thinking that God allowed, we see the authority and the rulership that He's given us, and we use it to bring change in our world. I want to finish with this little postscript. When I rang Auntie Shirley this week just to go through the details of Janelle's story and have permission to share it, she kept referring to John as a good man. Many times she kept talking to me about John being a good man. And then she told me that she had learnt to forgive, the process of forgiving, the lesson, the learning to forgive. She said she began to walk through forgiveness when years earlier her husband came to her one day and said, at the end of the month, I'm leaving to be with someone else and I'm not coming back. And he never did. And she explained to me how that walking through forgiveness, Jesus' words about not 7 times, but 70 times 7, how that helped her through this process. She even said to me that she loved her husband till the day he died, but that divorce was like a death without a funeral. And about a year after Janelle and the girls were killed, Auntie Shirley decided to make a photograph album of the 23 years of Janelle and John's married life, their family life, and all the good things, all the great memories. And she's put them in this photo album to celebrate that he was a good man. She said to me that her home group had got her through because she, in a home group, she could unload all her pain and suffering, and they would listen and help her through, and obviously her relationship with God. And she said there was a modern hymn that had really helped her, and I just want to read the words of the hymn. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future and life is worth the living just because he lives. I'm just going to hand over to Ali.